In this popular conversation between James Cameron and his dad, Kirk Cameron, on the topic of hell, they go through a lot of arguments for and against eternal conscious torment views. They go through scriptures and different theories on what is judicially proper, what is the character of God, and things like that. If you watch that keenly, you know there's one area that they maybe struggled, and it seemed to catch James in particular off guard. So I wanted to offer a little deeper insight into the meaning of the passages there in the book of Revelation.
But listen to this verse. This is a passage in Revelation chapter 14, and this one is really concerning. And then a third angel followed them, shouting, "Anyone who worships the beast and his statue, or who accepts his mark on their forehead or on the hand, must drink the wine of God's anger. It's been poured in full strength into God's cup of wrath, and they will be tormented with fire and burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb. The smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever, and they will have no relief day or night." And then in chapter 20, verse 10, similarly, "Then the devil who had deceived them was thrown into a fiery lake of burning sulfur, joining the beast and the false prophet. There they will be tormented day and night forever and ever."
One of the things about this passage is that it's an example of how we've begun to be conditioned into seeing ECT in everything, or seeing like clear teachings on the postmortem punishment of the unsaved. But is that even what this passage is intending to communicate? I have my doubts in Revelation 14 in particular. Trying to check out the context, and there's a series of bowls and plagues, and the cup of God's wrath is being poured out on this land. It sometimes uses the term Babylon, but it's using cryptic language like Babylon, using cryptic numbers like 666 to describe something that's going on in the Roman Empire and the persecutions being faced by Christians and providing comfort in the context of that. So there's a beast numbered 666, fitting for Nero in that case. There's multiple beasts. Don't be too confused. So when you see the beast getting thrown into the lake of fire at the end, that may or may not be Nero in particular. In fact, some consider the whole beast imagery to be something more symbolic of something bigger than a single human being. Then we get to chapter 14. There's the doom for the worshipers of the beast. Okay, so doom in this context for those who have devoted their allegiance to Nero. And in that time, there was the challenge facing Christians of whether they were going to say Jesus is Lord or Caesar is Lord. All the pressure was on them to say Caesar is Lord. And that's where Jesus' prophetic calling to not fear those who can destroy the body and do nothing else, but fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. That was the real thing facing these people who were trying to be Christians in the Roman Empire. They're being pressed with showing this worship, this allegiance to Nero, and there's comfort for the Christians that would do that. And I think that becomes evident a few verses later. "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." Okay, so this isn't an end times thing. This isn't everybody's been wiped off the earth and now here's a final judgment. There's something going on in the Roman Empire that John is writing them about. And that's why this blessing to the martyrs of the faith is pronounced after this passage that is so popular for ECT advocates to bring up, which says, so those receiving the mark on their forehead and on their hand, drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength, the cup of his anger. He will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and the presence of the Lamb. That is not necessarily talking about post-mortem punishment. All the earth has been wiped out, and now here's judgment. The holy angels are the ones in the mid-heaven at this point. So they're interacting between heaven and earth. They are inflicting judgment upon the earth. Okay, and then it says, the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest day and night, those who worship the beast in his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. So instinctively, we're conditioned to think, oh, since it says the word forever, that means that the conscious punishment in hell is forever. Well, hold on, we've got some hurdles to pass before we make that judgment. The context here is judgment on earth. So the smoke of torment going up forever and ever is paralleling an earthly judgment, and we can look at Isaiah 34. A context of Isaiah 34, total destruction of Edom. A lot of terms here that reinforce that idea that it's a total punishment. Utterly destroyed, slaughtered, slain, and thrown out. Corpses give off their stench. They're devoted to destruction. Okay, colorful language illustrating the total destruction of Edom, another Babylon type of empire who is the enemy of God and his people. And so it says, in verse 10 is central here, it will not be quenched night or day. Its smoke will go up forever. Okay, unquenchable fire and ever-rising smoke is not illustrating eternal conscious torment. It is illustrating total destruction, irreversible destruction, because Edom was said to have never been rebuilt. Now, readers of the New Testament, readers of the book of Revelation, are conditioned to think in terms of Old Testament imagery, because there's 400 to 500 Old Testament allusions in the book of Revelation. So reading it in that context will give the readers the understanding that this is echoing something similar to what would happen to Edom. So this imagery is echoing what happens to Edom. Edom typifies something that God does with his irreconcilable enemies. And when that's echoed here to those facing Roman persecutions, they have the same kind of comfort and hope and reassurance. And what about the fact that they have no rest day and night? No rest day and night is just illustrating the continuancy of their earthly fate. There's a lot of references to day and night, that idiom, throughout the Old Testament. Look at the psalmist has several here. Day and night your hand was heavy upon me. Was David under the heavy weight of the hand of God eternally? No, he was ultimately saved, right? My tears have been my food day and night. Constant, continuous, not eternal. And the way he has to face his enemies day and night, it feels like there's just a constant pressure against him. It didn't mean it goes on eternally. And when we look to the following chapters in the book of Revelation, it's going to reinforce that. And this idea actually gets unpacked a few chapters later. The bowls of God's wrath. There's the malignant sores for those who worship the image. Okay, that's part of the no rest day and night. Things in the sea died. Waters become blood. Okay, these are unpacking what it meant that they would have no rest day and night, and that they would be under the torment of God. And the smoke of this torment rising forever, as we saw in Isaiah 34:10, just illustrates the permanence of it, the totality of it. So, for multiple reasons, Revelation 14:10 and 11 does not say anything about the post-mortem fate of the unsaved suffering eternal conscious torment in hell. It illustrates an earthly judgment on an empire that was persecuting Christians, the totality of the judgment that would befall on them, and the blessing that would occur as a contrast for the people of God. And what Kirk did in reading these verses to his son, challenging him with them, is what a lot of people do in defending eternal conscious torment. They'll look at Revelation 14, they'll look at Revelation 20, and forget that the context changes pretty drastically between those sections. One's describing the fate of the people on earth for that time, and then by the time you get to Revelation 20, it looks at this more permanent judgment of God and the permanent salvation of God's people. And so what does the beast illustrate? Is that a person? It says here it's someone from the bottomless pit. Okay, and not necessarily a person. I think it'd be fitting to, some have suggested that the beast is more illustrated as false empires or anti-God governmental institutions, and the false prophet would illustrate false religion overall. And those are both exemplified in the Roman Empire at this time, both false worship and, false empire worship as well. So that's possible. Don't really know. But here's what it says in Revelation 20:10. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they'll be tormented day and night forever and ever. So if tormented day and night forever and ever means eternal conscious torment, then it speaks that over the devil, the beast, and the false prophet. Tormented day and night. So tormented, basanizo, would be a good word for torture or torment, same term. There are times that word is used and it's not on a conscious agent. The boat on the Sea of Galilee was being tormented by the waves. So beating against something else doesn't necessarily need to be conscious torment, but I don't think that's a good enough reason to deny that the devil is receiving conscious torment. Okay, day and night, so continuance, and then it says forever and ever. Now, sometimes you get one aionios, and we think, well, maybe that's just into the age, and this is forever and ever, so into the age of ages. So certainly, if it was meaning to communicate eternal time forward, that would be a fitting term to do so, it seems like. However, there is a little bit of wiggle room there too. So some who believe in conditional immortality still deny that the devil, beast, and false prophet will be eternally consciously tormented. Don't know. And frankly, it doesn't really matter to me. What's said is said about them, and we don't have to worry about the salvation or the condemnation or any sort of sharing the gospel with those three entities. What we do have to worry about is the fate for humanity, and that's what's communicated a few verses later. Okay, so we know that this writer, John, knows how to say tormented day and night forever and ever. And it'd be pretty simple to just say devil, beast, and false prophet and all of humanity rejecting Christ will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Instead, here's what the lake of fire does to humanity, because humanity is not immortal. Death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. By the way, parable of the rich man and Lazarus, where he says, I'm in torment in this flame, he's in Hades, not Gehenna, not the lake of fire. He's in Hades. So he's awaiting something that's going to come later. The lake of fire. This is the second death. So there's a judgment upon body and soul, according to Matthew 10:28. Body dies at one point, soul dies at another point. And they're ultimately brought to death. Anyone's name not found written in the book of life, he's thrown into the lake of fire. So to say that Revelation 20 teaches eternal conscious torment, we might say, yeah, maybe it does for three entities. But then it carefully makes the point that humanity suffers a separate fate from them. The lake of fire brings about a permanent death, a total death to those who are unsaved. And in case you don't know what death means, thanatos, always translated death. But in case you doubt the implications of that, it goes on to say, if they're not in the book of life, okay, he's thrown into the lake of fire. And as we go ahead to the ending of Revelation, it makes much better sense that the state of the world following this lake of fire is one that's purely good, purely the people of God, every knee bowing, every tear wiped away, and death is gone and done away with. So that's how the Camerons could respond in light of Revelation 14 and Revelation 20, bringing in parallel passages from Isaiah, understanding the context of the book of Revelation, and not being so persuaded and so knee-jerk as the culture is with just reading hell and ECT into places where it was never meant to be. But we'll let James and Kirk discuss this a little more, and maybe a few more comments.
There it seems to speak pretty clearly about the torment being forever and ever, not just the death sentence and the annihilation being irreversible, but the torment forever and ever.
Yeah, I came across that verse also, and it's a hard one, which is why I think it's also important that we don't say absolute statements of I'm right and you're wrong, because there's evidence and verses on both sides which we can cite. The best that we can do, essentially, is just have an opinion based upon the context and the scriptures as a whole. Have an opinion about what we think hell is. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to one thing. Turn from your sin and follow Christ.
Right.
That is your safest bet.
So on the one hand, I like what he says there. It is more important that we focus on turning from your sin and embracing Christ than that we quibble about meanings of some of these particular terms. On the other hand, I think he was a little uncomfortable with responding to the challenge that Revelation 14 and Revelation 20 posed. And so he kind of reverted back to what he was comfortable saying. So it became pretty clear. He didn't know what to say, but instead of trying to wrestle with the verse more like on the spot in the heat of the moment here, he said, well, you know what? We've got passages on both sides, and let's keep it about the main thing, which is correct. Now, there are passages on both sides. We can say that. However, what I try to show is that even the passages that the other side is using, they are not really passages that are strong for the other side when you look at them in context, using cross-references, trying to eliminate certain assumptions, and then understanding the real meaning of terms. When you do all that, when you do that proper hermeneutical work, it continues to show stronger and stronger support for conditional immortality. So I'd say for James, good job so far. The point is that you continue learning. As he continues to study, maybe these things in the book of Revelation will become a little more evident to him, and he'll find that they actually support conditional immortality as well.
You're right, James. That is the best that we can do. We are finite beings. Scripture's hard to understand. Paul even said that there are things that are difficult to understand. I say that this is right at the top of the list of difficult things. The sovereignty of God, the will of man, divine wrath. And at the end of the day, let's not camp out on hell. Let's camp out on heaven, right? It's down with hell, whatever it is. Conscious, eternal, torment, or annihilation. And by the way, within the annihilationist view, there is also room for judgment. It doesn't just mean that Hitler and sweet little grandma who sinned a couple times are both just snuffed out like this candle flame. Watch this. Everybody's just gone. No. There's room for judgment in that view,
exactly,
where Hitler gets his appropriate punishment,
full measure of his punishment. Yeah.
After the full punishment is executed, then he is removed from the land of the living forever. And so is everybody else after their appropriate punishment.
The watching internet world needs to understand what they just said in that section, that conditionalism allows for the proper term of punishment to occur. There's a lot of straw manning. There's a lot of coupling conditional immortality with Jehovah's Witness type of immediate annihilationism, and that is not what they're supporting here. They're saying that conditional immortality allows that flexibility so that there are different levels of punishment, so that the proper degree and measure of punishment can be doled out on any individual, because there are radically different individuals on this planet that would be deserving of radically different forms of punishment. Conditional immortality allows for that. ECT says no. Everybody is infinitely guilty, in which case there ought to be no degrees of punishment. And so they need to stop saying that, and they need to stop saying this is just a denial of hell. That's a foolish argument just based on their own definition, and it's circular reasoning because of that. They're not denying hell. They're saying hell is exactly what every person deserves. Nothing more, nothing less.
That maintains degrees of punishment, and yet it doesn't force us into conscious eternal torment. And at the end of the day, we're to be God's ambassadors from heaven, spreading the good news that there is a way out of God's justice and his wrath for sinners. And that is by faith in the gospel, that God sent a Savior to die on the cross, to take your punishment upon himself, so that when your eyes meet God's on the day of judgment and all of your sin is drug out as evidence of your guilt and rebellion, rather than giving you justice, Jesus is there who took your punishment. Your wrath was poured out on him, and now justice has been satisfied and you are set free. Not just as not guilty, but also fully righteous, because Christ's righteousness is your righteousness. This is where we should camp out and avoid hell and try to persuade everyone you know to avoid it also.
So, super exciting about where this conversation is going. Love this the thought process, the reasoning process through different passages, through philosophy, moral theory, judicial theory, and things like that. I look forward to seeing what happens in the future with these two, with some of the conversations they're going to host. Well, hopefully what I shared here kind of fills in some gaps regarding sort of a weak spot in their argumentation in their podcast. And we can even see that Revelation 14, Revelation 20 provide much better support for conditional immortality than for eternal conscious torment. To quote Todd Friel, discuss.